Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming and to our Community Conversations Housing for All. Our goal here today is to educate and inform people and to allow you the opportunity to ask questions of some of the people who live with these issues on a day-to-day basis. Before we get started, there are some thank yous I'd like to take care of. First, I'd like to thank the Cinema Arts people, Barbara and her crew, because they don't usually open up here until about 11 in the morning. I don't know if you folks know, but the Cinema Arts Center establishes a lot of its funding through memberships. And if you're not a member, you should definitely consider being a member, even if you never see a movie. They do a lot of other things here. They do stand-up comedy, they have live music, they have board games, and they host a lot of events like this one for community groups. It's a truly wonderful organization, and it is the memberships that really keep the place open and operating. Second, I'd like to I'd like to recognize some of our elected officials, past and present here. Councilwoman Joan Sergel is here. Chairman of the Huntington Planning Board, Paul Mandalik, is here. Former Huntington Town Councilman Ken Christensen will be leading one of our panels. And former Councilwoman Tracy Edwards, who's now head of Habitat for Humanity. I'd also like to thank the two committees that put in a lot of the work to putting this together. I'm just going to read the list of the organizations, but if you could stand up for your organizations, I'd appreciate it. That would be the Huntington Chamber of Commerce, Vision Long Island, the League of Women Voters of Huntington, the Huntington and Half Holland Hills Libraries, Housing Help in Latinos Unidos, Leadership Huntington, and our own Huntington Township Housing Coalition Steering Committee. As we move between the breaks, or if one of the breakout sessions doesn't appeal to you, I ask you to also check out the supporting organizations in the lobby, Realty Connect, People's United Bank, Housing Help, and the HDHC. So, you know, the reason we're here is because there is a widely recognized issue that we're having a problem with housing. And the demand is strong. Newsday was reporting this year how the market rate houses were being snapped up or being on sale for one day. When we run an affordable housing lottery for a home or a group of homes, there's literally hundreds more people applying for these affordable homes than we have available. The number of houses that the people who apply for these houses are all local. They're, by and large, already live and work here. They're not coming in from the city, they're not coming from other places. And so they're already here, they're already utilizing resources, they're already putting their cars on the road. And the question is, how do we accommodate these folks who are now currently living in basement apartments and other places? That's the tone against which we're going to be having today's panels. And to begin with, I'd like to recognize, of course, another of our elected officials here, and that's Supervisor Chad Lupinacci. Our first speaker has a long history of public service to the residents of the town of Huntington. He's been supervisor since the beginning of the year. Before that, he was our state assembly member for parts of Huntington and Babylon. He's a former trustee for the South Huntington Union Free School District, so he certainly understands how housing can affect the public schools. And he's a lifelong resident of the town of Huntington and a graduate of Walt Whitman High School. Ladies and gentlemen, our supervisor, Chad Lupinacci.
Good morning, everyone. And it's great to be here, and thank you to Roger and everyone who's participating today. And you know, it's certainly great to have a conversation, to learn more, to know what's on people's minds, and of course how it can affect housing and people of all age groups, younger and older, in terms of letting them live and fulfill their dreams to stay in Huntington and the surrounding areas. So you know, when some people might start out in apartments and move on to home ownership, but many members of our community may never be able to afford market rate homes, including properties for sale and of course for rent. Every time the Huntington Community Development Agency holds a lottery for an affordable housing unit, hundreds of people apply. In the case of Harborfields Estates on Pulaski Road in Greenlawn, the lottery was held in August and over 800 people applied for one affordable home. Just a few weeks ago, the CDA broke ground at Columbia Terrace, which will be a 14-unit affordable housing condo complex for veterans on the blocks between Lowndes Avenue and, of course, Columbia and Railroad Streets at Huntington Station. Construction is expected to take just under a year, and there will be an affordable housing lottery for those who meet the requirements when construction is complete. We know that many people will apply for the number of units that are available. Our veterans, along with many in our community, and of course retail, store sales staff, home health aides, restaurant workers, and others, are the very people who make our community work. But the median incomes for these jobs are well below rates that would allow them to afford a market rate home. All of the people involved are part of our community, and we need to explore ways to help find housing that they can afford. In order to keep generations together on Long Island, the availability of affordable housing and the ability to live affordably are key. And of course, we continue to develop Huntington Station, and if you've seen the progress that's been continuing there over the past several years from the Patron administration and now currently continuing it on with Northridge and Gateway. And also we're looking at the transfer of the property on the other side of New York Avenue from the state of New York to the town of Huntington, and that's in the process that will be going to the governor's desk. So if you look at the mix of retail space in Huntington Station, with the apartments on top, and some of them are affordable, that is continuing to improve and of course making great progress there. And now we'll be focusing on the other side of the street once the governor signs the legislation into law. And I believe he has to the end of December in order to do that, and then we'll be able to continue the progress in Huntington Station on the other side. The town's greatest role in the creation of affordable housing is one of being a facilitator. We need streamlined processes so that builders can afford to build efficiently and cost effectively to produce a low, competitively priced product for homeowners and renters. We need to do more with less and find ways to cut red tape to reduce the cost of conducting business with the town and lessen the burden on the taxpayer, making living and doing business in the town of Huntington more affordable across the board. And as we assess our options to increase the availability of affordable housing, we need to consider alternatives to the options that would add to an unsustainable burden on our infrastructure. This may include finding creative ways to help tap into our existing housing supply to fulfill the housing needs for those who feel they can't afford to live or rent on Long Island. And this applies to both those who currently live in Huntington and feel that financial pressure to leave New York, and those who want to live here but find it difficult considering the current options and current conditions. Just to give you a little prospect, a little bit of review about the affordable housing law that was passed in 2017. Last year, the town passed a law requiring all new construction of housing to have a 20% affordable component. One of the important ways we add to the inventory of affordable houses here in the community. This law in particular also addressed one of the other major issues we're dealing with in the town, an issue you may be familiar with, which is parking in Huntington Village. It required the developer of any new construction provide their own parking on site and not use nearby municipal lots to fulfill their parking requirements. The other thing that is currently going on is streamlining the permit and application process. Streamlining the building approval process helps save costs on buildings. Each time a project is delayed because of unnecessary bureaucracy at town hall or other levels of government, it significantly adds to the costs And the more it costs to build, the more the rent or the more the selling price is. Streamlining the process in Town Hall therefore helps lower the cost to build and helps keep housing costs lower. Last year, in response to the 4 to 8 week review period, the average was for the building permit process, the town implemented an expedited permit review process. The expedited review service includes a fee to help speed up wait times for applicants wanting streamlined services. This service doesn't impact other projects, as the expedited review occurs after normal business hours, and the fee charged for the expedited review covers the overtime costs without burdening the taxpayer. We're working on streamlining the permit review process so that applicants will not need to pay an additional fee for timely service. We have started ramping up same-day permits also to certain applications at no cost or no extra charges. Earlier this year, I asked the building department to look into permit applications that could reasonably be processed on the same day without negatively impacting wait times for other projects. Plumbing permits were already being issued same day, but other permits it took up to 4 to 8 weeks sometimes to process. After extensive review, it was determined that initially the town would be able to process 2 more permit types on the same day without impacting other wait times for swimming pools and also demolition permits. Swimming pools made sense, and because they're timely, of course, you need them within that seasonal period. Demolition permits also made sense because it is a structure that had to come down, and there was either a safety issue or something else that had to go in its place, and of course it could hold up construction projects for weeks. Since March, we've been processing these 3 permit types same day and other permit types in fewer than 2 weeks, which is a huge improvement from the 4 to 8 week waiting period prior to the undertaking. We're looking at adding other building permits to the same day process, such as sheds, decks, and other small projects. Every added efficiency helps keep costs down for the builder, which in turn keeps costs down for either the homeowner or the renter. Going on to the ZBA now, some of the reforms that we're trying to make at the ZBA include our public hearing on streamlining the scheduling of the ZBA hearings. At our last town board meeting on November 8th, we scheduled a public hearing to allow the streamlining of the rescheduling of zoning board hearings when zoning board of appeals meetings must be canceled or postponed. After they were canceled or postponed, it would put the builder or the developer off for many weeks because they had to re-advertise that their issue was going in front of the ZBA. On Tuesday, November 20th, at 7 p.m., the town board is going to hold a public hearing to consider streamlining the notice requirement procedure for the zoning board of appeals. In the event a ZBA meeting is canceled, hearings scheduled for that date would be automatically rescheduled for the next scheduled ZBA hearing date with no re-advertising required. And this would save the town from duplicating its cost of advertising the hearing, and it would also make it easier on other applicants as the next meeting is typically 1 week away and they wouldn't have to wait an additional 6 to 8 weeks to be heard after the advertising. And this measure would cut potentially 1.5 to 2 months on the project development time. So save the date and have your voice heard. So if you want to come out and speak at the public hearing, that's November 20th at 7 p.m. Now, in the private market, we know that supply and demand dictates what a property will sell for. But it's important that once a home is built and offered as affordable, it stays affordable. Of the recent projects that include affordable units, the CDA holds a lottery, as I was mentioning before, and the home is sold to the first person whose number is selected, who meets all the income and the other requirements to purchase the affordable unit, and actually helps secure the mortgage. So as I was mentioning, the lotteries we hold in Town Hall, one of the last ones had over 800 applicants. And I stood there pulling out the first 100, right, tickets. And, you know, usually they go down the list until they meet with the person that has the requirements. And I believe that the person that was picked as number 1 did have all the paperwork and all the requirements met. But the other 799 people, right, were out of luck because they weren't pulled. So we do have it written into the contract that the affordable home will stay affordable in perpetuity. So while the home prices may fluctuate over time with the market, the affordable units will stay affordable relative to the market and the affordable price at which it was originally sold. Some believe that those who move into an affordable home should be able to sell it later at market rate, but this would only result in the continual loss of affordable housing stock, erasing the original intent of the prospect of the affordability. While in the traditional market, a person has the right to profit off their investment, the whole purpose of requiring 20% of the units to be affordable requires the initial market intervention to make these homes available to those who cannot afford a market rate home, and the further market intervention to keep the unit affordable. That said, home ownership is not always right for everyone, so not only do you want the stock of affordable homes that where people need to buy, but also being able to have housing of other options, including renting. So, of course, when I go into the classroom, I ask my students, I know that I always ask them, because I still do some teaching, and I say, well, how many of you, want to own a home one day? Unanimously, whether it's 38 students in one class, 30 in another, they all raise their hands. But depending on what phase you are in your life and where you want to be and how big your family is, or if you're single, depends on whether you're going to rent or you're going to buy it first. So you need to make sure all housing options are available for people, depending on their part of their life. And some people may want to go on, and I know at one time, especially post-Depression to World War II, was very, very popular. You had more renters than homeowners because that was the typical lifestyle that many people wanted to have. So, as we know, home ownership, of course, is an investment, right? But renting is, of course, a great, reasonable alternative. Once you purchase your first home, you soon realize all of the costs that are related to home ownership. I mean, just think of all the time we spend at our homes, everything you have to do, from the upkeep to the repairs, to the replacements, to the upgrades, and sometimes your neighbors, right? Who are there too. Well, one great thing is I do have great neighbors. I'm not home that much, right? But the little time that I am home, it's always fixing a problem or paying a bill. So, so affordable housing for many people means also having an affordable apartment in a good neighborhood, right, without the added cost of home ownership. The dilemma is maintaining an apartment supply where there's demand from potential renters and at the prices the average or low-wage earner can afford. Many new apartment developments are more expensive than what most people can afford. This is partially due to the cost to build and the developer's right to earn a return on their investment. That is why they invest, to earn a return. One of our first goals in office was to streamline the building process to keep those costs down, because the developers' costs largely determine what they sell or rent their units for. This year the town has achieved some of those efficiencies, and we're looking at more ways to make the process even more efficient. We do have challenges we need to address when discussing policies related to housing, right? We have limited open space and an already overburdened infrastructure in terms of roads, schools, the water supply, and we do have an untapped resource we need to consider, our existing housing supply that I want to speak to a little bit. But just to speak about rents in the area, and I know that if you look at living in someone's basement, right? The average cost of living in someone's basement, $1,200, right, for a basement apartment. If you look at some of those beautiful apartments throughout Huntington Village, the new apartments going up in Huntington Station at market rate, right, starting at $2,500, just to kind of give you consideration of what the costs are out there. So, just want to go over some of the things that we are reviewing at Town Hall right now, especially with the accessory apartment law that has come in front of us. Town law currently does not allow the owner to live in the apartment and rent out the house. So if we're talking about accessory apartments. So if you have an accessory apartment, you can live in the main part of the house and rent out the apartment, but you can't do vice versa. Well, what we're doing is we're looking at maybe changing this law and basically help people through the process if the town board and it's agreed that this accessory apartment law should be changed. So many of our young residents either leave New York or are living in their parents' basements well into their 30s or even 40s. When I was in law school, I had a professor from the Midwest, and she said, you know, all you Long Island kids are the same. You all live with your parents into your 50s, right? Because when she was 18 and she was from Wisconsin, whether she was in college or she was living, you went out on your own because it was very affordable to have your first apartment, not live with your parents, hang out and have your friends over. And I'm not even talking about dorm style. So if you look at this and you look at the numbers, people are staying with their parents much, much longer. I know one of my former staff members, he's a lawyer, he's in his 30s, he has a very good job with the state, and he's at home. He goes, why would I change? My mom does my laundry, my father's my short order cook. He goes, it's the best, and it's like a family compound over in East Northport. But I think most people do have the goals, right, to move out at some point, get their independence. I know last night speaking to one of my friends who was in the Melville Fire Department, he was 25, he just moved into his first apartment. He wanted a little freedom from, his family and his parents, but at the cost of $1,000 a month, right? And, he has a good job at the age of 25, but that's still a lot to put out. So basically when we look at this, people are even now getting married, living at home, raising their children in their parents' basements. And older, long-time residents who no longer have a need for or want to maintain a large home have no option to downsize in the area at a cost that makes sense for them. And I was attending a wedding last night of a former student. When speaking to the parents, they go, we have a place in Florida, but we want 55 and over. In Huntington, we want to be near our first grandchildren, but there is a shortage of that too. So it's not only looking at older people or looking at younger people, but across the spectrum of what the wants and needs are at that time. So it's very important to have this, into consideration. So, and I know you are going to be looking at reforming the accessory apartment law today, so we look forward to that discussion and the input that's coming out of there, because there's a lot that we could take back to from the town. But continuing on with the accessory apartment law, so modification there to let homeowners rent their homes in a way that makes financial sense for them is something the town should seriously take a look at, and something that we'll continue to have a conversation and we'll discuss along with all the people that are very interested, and also with our town board members, because it's good for property rights. It would allow residents to stay near their families on Long Island for longer. It would help reduce, right, people leaving the area to go find more affordable houses, but still maintain families here, maintain the intelligence of people not having to take their skills to other states, but leave it right here in an area, and of course open up an affordable apartment rental supply for us. So accessory apartments tend to be offered at lower prices than the apartments created at the new developments. So, I started my administration this year with an open door policy, always interested in hearing feedback from the community and concerns and any type of suggestions that you want to make, and of course continuing on that conversation as you go forward. So I know you have a lot of breakout sessions today that will be very interesting, and I look forward to further conversations with everyone here, and of course any input that people have for me. So thank you very much.
All right, if I could ask our moderators to come up here, and while they're coming up, I will deal with a little housekeeping. Again, let's thank the supervisor for coming here and speaking today. Thank you. I would encourage you to read the biographies. Just grab a seat and I'm going to move the biographies are in the program, so we're not going to spend a lot of our time dwelling on them, but I do urge you to read them. Also inside the program is a glossary of some of the terms that we throw around frequently, because we realize that things that we assume everybody knows isn't always the case. So now we're going to have a brief introduction by the moderators of what each of the committees, or each of the sessions is going to discuss. Ken, you want to start?
Sure. I'm Ken Christensen, and I will be moderating with an excellent panel of people who are going to talk about accessory apartments. You heard the supervisor talk about that. We are going to give a little history, talk about the process of getting an accessory apartment, and then get into some issues and questions. In the room, for all of the varied panel members, panels that are being held, the breakout sessions, will be someone with cards going around. So if you have a question, we're going to try and do it that way, where you put the question down and then somebody will collect it, and the moderator will select questions to be answered during that period of time. Accessory apartments will be in this room, okay? Right after we do the closing.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Jennifer Cassidy with People's United Bank. I am going to be moderating the Dollars and Cents panel. So we're going to really be talking about and diving into what does affordable lending look like, what is the process, how can we help first-time home buyers, and again, right, to speak to what the supervisor said, how do we help those young people who want to realize that dream of home ownership get into their first home. And there's a lot of misconceptions about first-time home buying that we're hoping to put at bay today with our amazing expert panel that's going to speak to a lot of that.
Rita.
Good morning. My name is Vida Scaturo. I'm the Vice Chair of the Huntington Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be sitting in the housing options for intergeneration communities, village apartment and community development. In my panel, I have Barry Light, who's a commercial real estate attorney, Huntington, Trudy Fitzsimmons, and Alyssa Kaya from Vision of Long Island. Have a great day, everyone.
And I'll be hosting the panel that is going to be on the impacts that the housing options that we choose end up having on the environment and the schools. So first, Ken's one on the affordable housing, the accessory apartments will be here, and Jennifer's will be up the hall, and then following that, Vita's one will be here, and mine will be up the hall. There should be some time in between each one, so you can use restroom breaks and go see the people in the sky room. And so, as we said, grab cards. Ask questions. We'll be collating them, and any questions that don't get asked during the sessions, we will endeavor to answer on our website or through Facebook afterwards. All right? Thank you very much.
There's more coffee.
There is presently more coffee, so if you want to get more coffee.
Okay, if you want community accessory apartments, stay in this auditorium. Okay, let's start. We have a panel up here, and I'll introduce them. We have Matt Harris here on my left, who's been an outstanding community activist, resident of Huntington for a number of years. Joe Rose in the middle. Joe Rose is the Deputy Director of Public Safety for the town of Huntington, and the guy that really handles a lot of the enforcement issues and the process, and he'll be speaking about that for accessory apartments. And on the end is Ed Nikowitz, who is an attorney and serves as the hearing officer, hearing all of the applications and different things that come before him in regards to accessory apartments. So we're going to start this out. I'm going to give you just a very brief history of the accessory apartment legislation. In 1985, then Supervisor Jack Neal appointed a task force on illegal housing. I happened to be the Huntington Chamber of Commerce representative of that and was elected by that task force to be its chairman. In 1986, I'll give you a little background. The people on that committee were probably about 12, I think, of us. And when we first started, half of the people came with the attitude of, let's throw them all out and preserve this town that are here illegally. And the other half said, we got to do something. And 1 year later, about 1 year later, that task force made a unanimous decision or report to the town that stated the following main points. One was to establish the provision to have legal accessory apartments in the town of Huntington. Another one was all residential rental properties should be inspected at least every 2 years. No rental property should be advertised if not legally registered. Definition of family to include both related and non-related up to a maximum of 5 persons. And that residential dwelling should be included in C6 zoning. When I was writing this, I realized that in all of these years since that has been done, all of these recommendations are now the law of Huntington, have been legislated and enacted. In 1991, the town held 2 public hearings, and the town board passed local law 1, 1991, and that was for the regulation of accessory apartment uses in the town of Huntington. The legislation at that time contained a grandfather provision that allowed a dwelling that was not occupied by the owner to be eligible for an accessory apartment if they signed up within the 3-year period. That was later extended by the town board at that time 3 years later, and they extended it for another, I think, 2 or 3 years. That no longer exists on the books, and the non-owner occupied apartments are slowly but constantly dwindling as they change hands. In 2005, the existing town board at that time made 2 major amendments to the existing accessory apartment law. The original law covered all residential zoning. A new amendment eliminated the older zoning in the town that was 50 by 100 plots, and mandated that that be a minimum of 75-foot frontage and 7,500 square feet of property. The other amendment mandated the owner of property live in the larger section of the dwelling, no matter what the situation of that, whether that person was alone or the size of the family. You heard the supervisor address that just a few minutes ago. So that's the brief history. There's a much longer history, but I'd like to get to the panelists now. And the first one I'm going to call upon is Joe Rose, who's really the man on the street in terms of dealing with accessory apartments on a day-to-day basis. And Joe, if you would just go through the process and talk. There's a microphone right there.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joseph Rose. I am the Deputy Director of Public Safety for the town of Huntington. Under our jurisdiction for public safety is accessory apartments, as well as code enforcement and security. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because they sort of tie into each other. The accessory apartment program is managed and inspected by code inspectors as far as doing their inspections of the dwellings to make sure everything is in compliance. But how this started out is in 1991, the ordinance was passed, and the town of Huntington, in my opinion, and actually my experience, is these accessory apartments maintain the integrity of a single-family dwelling. And what I mean by that is there are sets of conditions and requirements that are imposed on the property owner to keep the dwelling characteristic of a single-family dwelling. We're not allowed to have multiple mailboxes, multiple front doors. It's a program that I find very successful as far as having a very low impact on the neighbors. If you were to compare it to a house that is running in an illegal apartment, you would have, code enforcement would receive a complaint with regards to multiple cars parked out on the streets, people coming and going all times of night, people not maintaining their property in compliance with town code, fire safety code, as well as the building code. The accessory apartment, legal accessory apartments, manages all that. So if code enforcement would receive a complaint regarding a property with an illegal apartment, and an investigation is conducted and it's confirmed it's an illegal apartment, we would address the property owner to come into compliance by one of 2 ways: either restoring the property back to its original legal use or applying for an accessory apartment. How that process works is they would come into the Accessory Apartment Bureau, which is here in Town Hall. They would schedule a consultation meeting with our support staff. and they would be given instruction in depth of all of the parameters that are associated with an accessory apartment. And there's some conditions that they have to follow. You need to make sure that the property it's a legal habitable space. It has to be a single-family dwelling. It has to be owner-occupied. The apartment itself cannot exceed 650 square feet. It cannot exceed 2 bedrooms. All parking associated with the accessory apartment must be maintained off-street. And in our experience with code enforcement, 2 of the biggest complaints that we get about illegal apartments is people parking their cars in front of other people's homes. And that's what generates usually a call to our Department of Code Enforcement. So if we take in an application and everything lines up with the people who are applying and their accessory apartment permit is issued, they are to adhere to conditions that follow suit with the permit. If for some reason a permit holder does not follow the conditions, I'm sure we'll receive a complaint from a neighbor saying that the tenants of this apartment are parking out in the street. Can you please investigate? What we can do is code enforcement will open up a case through the Accessory Apartment Bureau. They will be investigated by one of our ordinance inspectors, and if it proves that one of the tenants is parking their vehicle out in the street, that's considered a town code violation, and they could be issued notices of violations, and if they don't comply, it could result in a court summons. The property owner is held responsible to maintain the integrity of the apartment. As far as we wanted to keep the integrity intact as far as keeping the appearance of a single-family dwelling, having a very minimal impact on the community. We take great pride that when people drive down the road, they pass by single-family dwellings and they have no idea that there is a single-family dwelling with an accessory apartment also associated with that property. I've attended many meetings and hearings where people are upset because they say that they don't want an accessory apartment in their neighborhood, and during the hearing we'll see that there's 3 right on their street that they were never aware of. So for me personally, I take great pride in that, and we do monitor this very regularly. It's something that we don't have a huge problem with as far as people not adhering to the rules, but when we do have someone that doesn't adhere to the rules, we do have enforcement action. Again, the process starts out, you can come into our town hall, meet with our Accessory Apartment Bureau, they give you a consultation. If it's decided that you want to go forward with legalizing the apartment, then an inspection will be scheduled for you to have it inspected by an ordinance inspector to make sure that the property is in 100% compliance with New York State, town, local ordinances, and then you will have to go to a hearing. It's a public hearing that is manned by a hearing officer. It also allows people to come and speak in pro or against the application, and if it's signed off on, then it would go to the zoning board basically for a final approval.
Why don't you hand the mic to Ed? Our next panelist is Ed Nikowitz, who is the hearing officer that officiates over these meetings where the applicant comes before for approval or for applicants that come that have violated the regulations. Ed?
Sure. Thank you very much. My name is Ed Nikowitz. It's been my privilege to serve as the hearing officer for the better part of the last 10 years for the accessory apartment program. Many people in this room may have actually appeared at some of the hearings that we have. So I'd like to introduce the hearings by going over a little briefly what I'd like to share with you today. The accessory apartment program is, as we've heard today, an affordable housing initiative originally, so that we can help people stay and live in Huntington. The idea, however, is to maintain the integrity of the neighborhoods. Oftentimes when there are hearings, neighbors come because they want to be heard as to why accessory apartments should not be in their neighborhood. And I advise everybody that the best thing that you want, if you're concerned about illegal apartments, if you're concerned about apartments that are gone awry in your neighborhood, you want accessory apartments. You know, I have a special needs son, and one day he's going to live in a group home. So oftentimes during the course of my life, I've investigated, you know, group homes. And before my son was born, we had a Department of Social Services house in our neighborhood, and it was terribly unsupervised. And as a father of a disabled son, it broke my heart to see that. I mean, people were just running rampant all over the neighborhood. And I understand the fears that we as a community have to make sure that the character and quality of our neighborhood is maintained well. The neighborhood we love and cherish, we want to make sure we live on a block that's peaceful, clean, safe. So, when people come to hearings, oftentimes neighbors come to hearings to hear about the new application, to hear about the accessory apartment going in my neighborhood. Sometimes, you know, it's humorous because I'll hear them say, listen, Mr. Nikowitz, well, we're not against apartments. We just think that, you know, our neighborhood is really nice. And this is the wrong neighborhood to put an apartment in. And I always like sharing with them. I say, well, the good news is that in my neighborhood there are 3, because I personally approved them. Are you saying I live in a crappy neighborhood? You know, but then I tell homeowners during the hearings, whether it's for a new application or for revocation, I tell homeowners the same thing all the time. If your neighbors come to our hearings, it is a good thing. Because oftentimes it's the mystery of the accessory apartment, right? It's who's going to be living in there? What are the conditions? Now, you remember, this is it's a special use permit that's approved by the zoning board. So I conduct a public hearing so that I can make recommendations to the zoning board as to whether or not they should approve the application. Or, in the case of where there might be a violation or a condition that's not being followed or met, whether or not that should be revoked. So I like to tell the homeowners in the first instance, your neighbor's coming is a great thing because it demystifies everything. Oh, your mom's living there. You know, or I have a concern about X, Y, and Z. We actually had one instance where part of the conditions of the accessory apartment was you had to pump your cesspool 3 times a year. A lot of times people come before me and the biggest issue they have is the parking. And obviously that is a concern, right? But as an accessory apartment permit holder, you can be directed as a condition of the permit to park off-street. You have to make sure you've got enough spaces off the street to park all the vehicles associated with the home and the apartment. So people say to me, you know, well, okay, but. And my response to okay, but is this. Let's say the applicant sells their house to the Brady family. And the Bradys have, you know, of course they have Mike and Carol, Greg, Marsha, Cindy, Jan, Bobby, Peter, and all the rest, and of course, you know, the little blonde kid that came in last season. And they all have cars. And I can't tell them to park in the driveway. You have no control over that. You can't tell the Bradys to pump their cesspool. You can't tell the Bradys to make sure that the numbers on the house are clearly viewable so that fire or ambulance attendants come. So the beautiful thing about this program, the reason why I love what I do as an accessory apartment hearing officer is one, I make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be heard and that any issues that arise, either during the initial application process are addressed, or that any issues that arise after the permit is addressed, are followed. One last note, it's an expensive process. You know, you take a single family house and you have to meet certain conditions and requirements to put an accessory apartment in. I often use the figures, it probably costs about $10,000 on average to put an accessory apartment in. Well, it actually costs more to remove it. That's the anvil that hangs over the head of somebody who has an accessory apartment permit. Because, you know, I have a memory like an elephant. I used to have a body like one too, but I haven't had memory like an elephant. And if somebody comes before me and they say, we're going to do X, we're going to do Y, and I'm asking them to do X and Y, and I find out that they're not living there, they're parking inappropriately, they're clogging up the streets, I will recommend to the zoning board that it be revoked. That's an expensive issue for a homeowner who has went so far to get that permit. So there are leverages that the community has. There are assurances that the community has. And final note, and this is often what I hear at the hearings, is this. Mr. Nikowitz, that apartment was illegal for so many years, and now they're applying for an accessory apartment permit. You're going to reward them by recommending an accessory apartment permit? Well, and my answer is always, I use my sense of humor, my answer is always, so they're coming to now legalize it, they're offended that they're illegal, and now we're going to of course we're going to want them to legalize, because with that comes all those controls. One last part of my opening. If you if you are applying for an accessory apartment in the town of Huntington, and you come into the offices for the Accessory Apartment Bureau, you're going to meet Tracy Beck, who runs the office, who's wonderful at what she does, and will answer every single question about the process you can have. I could not do what I do for the town without Tracy and Joe Rose. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ed. I just want to remind you before Matt speaks, there are ladies here with cards. If you have questions, just raise your hand and they'll come by and they'll give you a card and a pencil so that you can submit questions. Our next panelist is Matt Harris, who I introduced before, a gentleman who's been living in the town of Huntington, Huntington Station area for a good many years, and is a real community activist doing a lot of great things in this community. Matt?
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, about 2010, I learned about a housing project that was going to go up on a wooded lot not far from me called Avalon Bay. And one of the components of that was something known as a transit-oriented district. Now, I've been accused of being anti-housing, which I'm not. Huntington certainly has a housing crisis, there's no question. But what was proposed back in 2010 was a complete rezone of the area around Huntington train station, known as a transit-oriented district. That would have increased the density from current 14.5 units per acre garden apartment to a 20 unit per acre apartment complex that was just way too dense for the community, the suburban nature of the area. And I fought that with a group of like-minded neighbors of mine, and we won. We stopped that housing project. It eventually got built at a much lower density, but we stopped the 20 units per acre. The accessory apartment law is one of the solutions to our housing crisis. Certainly being able to put an accessory apartment in an existing home so that it doesn't look like there are additional people living in it is one of the cost-effective solutions to solving our housing crisis. I'm certainly in favor of doing the swap where if you're a homeowner, let's say for instance you're a grandma and you're home alone. You're living in a 4-bedroom house. You have an accessory apartment. You don't need 4 bedrooms anymore, but you can make more money renting out your 4-bedroom house and living in a 1-bedroom accessory apartment. I'm all in favor of that. That's a perfect solution to a housing crisis for young families that can't afford the $2,700 a month rent at Avalon Bay, which I think is absurd. I mean, that's a mortgage payment. As far as I'm concerned, you're renting an apartment at Avalon Bay, you could buy a house and have a mortgage. But if you need 3 bedrooms, and you can rent a house with an accessory apartment, and the owner is living in the accessory apartment, I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. All right, thank you. You heard, I'm going to introduce some things, some ideas, some concepts, some maybe changes that are being proposed, are going to come before the town pretty soon. I'm going to throw that out to the panel and have them react, and certainly I would like you in the audience to react to it too. You heard the supervisor address one of the things, and I thought addressed it very positively, like he certainly felt there was a change, and that is what Matt just related to just a few minutes ago. And that is the inability at the current time for a homeowner, and let's look at this, it probably would affect empty nesters, seniors more than anybody else, but they want to stay in the town of Huntington, They want to continue to live in their own house, but they certainly don't need the entire space that they have now. And in order to be afforded to stay here and live as comfortably as they've done through all the years, they would like to rent the larger portion of their home, the 2-bedroom, maybe even 3-bedroom, and live in the accessory apartment that's part of that house. Currently, under the law, with the amendments that they made back there in, at that time, you're not allowed to do that. The owner must live in the larger portion of the house. To me, it doesn't make any sense, and a lot of people who agree with me, I'm sure there's some out there that disagree for whatever reason. But that's a proposed change. The other change is when they made the significant amendment was, as I first said in the history, when this law was initially passed, it covered all residential zonings. There was no exclusion of any residential zoning, whether you were 14 acre or you were 50 by 100 plot in some of the older zoning districts. And they changed that so that now 50-foot frontage was no longer acceptable. It went to 75-foot frontage. What this in essence did was take out all of the older homes, those that were built under original zoning in the early stages of Huntington being developed. Most of them are in Huntington Station. There's some in Greenlawn, East Northport. But they were no longer eligible. Doesn't mean that some of these are in the older places, probably the less economic viable places, and probably where the need is the most. That's the other proposal that's coming out of Housing Coalition and other groups to ask the town board to change or reverse back to make accessory apartments more available to the people out there that need them. So those are the two basic changes that in the code. The other change, and I'm laying these all out so that if you have questions and you want to find out more information, it'll be available to you. We have an affordable housing trust fund, which was set up really when the Greens got developed, and part of the compromise there for allowing the Greens to go ahead was that they would form this a trust fund, and actually the Greens put in $2 million as their assessment to that to start the fund. The fund's been in existence for a number of years, and we've done a number of great things with the fund. The mission is to create more affordable housing. And one of the ideas that's being considered now, in fact, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee is totally in favor of doing it. It's now just working out the details. And that is through these funds to provide low interest loans to people who need to make that expensive conversion of changing an illegal one to a legal accessory apartment, or initially putting an accessory apartment in their house. It's a very expensive proposition. And this would help fund that. And there's a lot of ideas going around about how the structure of the fund should be set up, whether there should, depending on the interest rate, what we make the apartment affordable. So there's a lot of details going into it that are being worked on right now. But that's a concept that's out there. So we have these three things that we will be asking the town board to consider and to vote on. And first of all, while I review these cards, I'd like anybody on the committee to react to any of those suggestions.
With regards to switching the occupancy, so if the property owner were to now maintain the accessory apartment as opposed to the main portion of the dwelling, The accessory apartment doesn't switch the limitations of legal occupancy. What I mean by that is if it's a legal 4-bedroom house, under the state law and the town code, it still cannot be overcrowded. So it's not going to increase the volume of people in the house. It still has to be within the permitted use of the property. As far as the legal bedrooms, overcrowding will be managed. It's not possible because of the legal bedrooms, the size requirements that's mandated by the state. So you're not increasing occupancy loads of a property by having the resident switch from the accessory apartment to the main dwelling.
Anybody else?
Yeah, as a hearing officer, I mean, it really doesn't, it's a sensible alteration of what we're doing. I mean, oftentimes when people come before me, they are seniors. They're seniors and they've been living in their house, and part of the idea of affordable housing is to make sure that it continues to be affordable for people who are seniors. So giving seniors the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to have this accessory apartment where I'm going to reside, I'm going to rent out the balance of it. It's very, very sensible, and it won't actually change how we manage the accessory apartments once they're approved.
Just on that quick point, the parking situation of the Brady's are now upstairs. Wouldn't the Brady's allow to park all over the place?
The Brady's would. The Brady's would, but see, the accessory apartment permit would still have the conditions of off-street parking, right? So the answer is if Grandma Brady is living in the apartment and Greg Marchison, and the little blonde guy from last season are living in the main house, the condition of the permit is they still have to have off-street parking, so it doesn't change. That's why I'm comfortable with it.
Let me read. How many accessory apartments, legal accessory apartments are currently in the town of Huntington?
Currently, we're approximately at around 1,750 legal accessory apartments in the town.
By the way, just outside the door is a map that shows you where they are, and they're, we don't have control over incorporated villages, but that map will show you how widespread they are in every area of the town. There is a regulation regarding that within a half-mile radius, you cannot saturate that area with accessory apartments more than 10% of the housing in that group. And you want to
Yeah, I do want to speak to that because when we do the hearings for new applications, the first thing that we run after the application process is started, Tracy Beck will run for me a saturation report to make sure that in that half-mile radius, there's no more than 10% of the homes that have accessory apartment permits. So you don't even get to the point of a public hearing if a neighborhood is saturated. Now, my understanding as the hearing officer is that currently the total number of neighborhoods that have hit the saturation point, carry the one above it, none. So we're okay right now. We haven't saturated any neighborhoods.
Thank you, Ed. Does adding an accessory apartment result in a change in the house's tax assessment? And the answer to that is no. Okay, there is no reassessment of your house for having an accessory apartment. What you do pay is the garbage fee. You pay 50% more on top of your original garbage collection fee. That's because of the additional, what does happen, to be perfectly honest, if you apply for accessory apartment and you have things that you were constructed in that house that never received the CO for, certificate of occupancy, that will trigger an improvement, depending on what it is, for the evaluation of the house. But that should have been there without the accessory apartment. It's not the accessory apartment that's adding to the assessment. It's improvements made to the house that were never permitted or received the CO. What is the difference between an accessory apartment and a mother-daughter? Joe?
Well, the town does not recognize mother-daughter. Accessory apartment, again, is a owner-occupied property. I think Smithtown may be one of the only jurisdictions that might have a mother-daughter type of apartment. But when people talk about mother-daughter, they're basically, in this town, they're referring to an accessory apartment. It's just an additional dwelling unit within a single-family dwelling.
Is the possibility of rent control for accessory apartment a topic of conversation? I will just tell you that that has not, for my knowledge, that has not been prior before. But it is one of the things that's being considered by the trust fund. And what they're looking at, and nothing's been decided yet, we're looking at a lot of statistics in that if we give you money or loan you money at a low interest rate, what we're considering, depending on what that interest rate is, that you're required to be $200 under market maybe for one interest rate, $400 under market for another interest. I'm just giving you, throwing off the top of my head examples. So that would be some sort of rent control, but it would only apply to the time that you owe the money, the term of the loan, owe the money back to the trust fund. So it's being debated now. We're trying to figure out what the most equitable way of doing that is. This was the answer. Is an accessory apartment permit required if the area has a kitchen and I would like to move my elderly parents in? I think you answered that. There is no such thing as a mother-daughter, and if you do have another kitchen, the answer to that question is yes. Anybody disagree? Oh, it's a good question. You mentioned a number of committees that are involved in things. How does one find out to sit on one of these committees? Most committees of the town, and especially in this area, are appointed by members of the town board. The trust fund committee has 5 members of the housing coalition who determine, and then each town board member has an appointee. I think the supervisor has 2 on the trust fund. But other committees that are town board appointed are usually all appointed by the town board. Now, there are groups like the Town Housing Coalition that are just private civic groups that are interested in housing, and they're open for anybody to participate and to come and get themselves involved in. How many violations have been reported after the accessory apartment have been granted? Are violations litigated?
We do, I can't give it a specific number of how many violations that we have to investigate after a permit's been issued, but every single complaint that we receive regarding a legal accessory apartment permit holder is investigated by code enforcement as well as the Accessory Apartment Bureau. Sometimes we do find violations and we take proper measures to make sure it's correct, the violation is corrected.
And there are things that happen. The building code can change. The state building code or the town building code can change, and more stringent regulation is put in. And if in that cycle of that annual inspection, if something, I know I had to put fireproofing on my boiler room door. Was picked up by them. Is those types of things that if they do occur, you have to stay up with the current building code if you have an accessory apartment to make your place safe. Ed?
Well, we also have, when something comes up with regard to an accessory apartment where there is a condition of the permit that's not being met, or some sort of possible violation, we schedule what we call appearance hearings. Appearance hearings, sometimes we refer to them as revocation hearings. And again, I always like to share with the public that that's one of the benefits of the accessory apartment law. So you have a circumstance where you've learned that maybe somebody's not in compliance, or not, they're parking on the street even though they're pledged not to, or there's permits that have not been attained, or the biggest one, of course, is that maybe somehow in the last year they're no longer living there. We set these hearings up largely as a mechanism to warn those folks, listen, here's your last chance. You've got 2 weeks to get in compliance. We're going to send Joe Rose and the inspectors to go take a look at what's going on in that house. And if you don't, then we're going to recommend to the zoning board that the permit be revoked. So there's the violations of the code, and there's also the violations of the conditions of the permit, but both of which we have the leverage to kind of enforce by virtue of that anvil of, we could withdraw this permit, we don't want to, but you've got to be in compliance.
Thank you, Ed. I think it's the last one. Has the minimum frontage required for accessory apartments been reduced? And I think in the history I gave you, that did happen under the town board a number of years ago, early, I think 2001 or something like that. And that's one of the things that a lot of us think should be reversed. It's so that we're not discriminating against people with small pieces of property that live in the older sections of this town. So it had been reduced under that amendment, and it's one of the things we're trying to bring back. Okay, this multiple question thing here. As an illegal accessory apartment permit holder, when I put my ad for 1 bedroom, I received hundreds of calls from 3 to 4 people in a family. There is a greater need for larger unit permits. Are basements qualified for legal accessory apartments? Joe, you want to answer that?
Sure. Currently under the town code, basement apartments are legal. However, you have to adhere to the New York State guidelines and making uninhabitable space habitable. And that requires having proper egress pursuant to the state code installed. You have to follow every single requirement that our building department requires to convert uninhabitable space to habitable. If you have each bedroom in a basement, I'll give you a quick example of a basement. If there's 2 bedrooms in a basement apartment, you need an egress that meets the state requirement for each individual bedroom, as well as a separate means of egress for the rest of the unit that's in the basement. Again, as long as it can meet the state's requirements for habitable space, yes, a basement apartment can be legalized.
Thank you, Jim. If homeowners are permitted to live in a smaller portion of the same home, would there be a consideration to change the 650 square foot accessory size of the apartment? I think all of those square footages get revised so that that's the limitation now, so it'd have to be done away with, so that a larger portion of the house, whatever size it is, that was the main portion of the house that the owner lived in, now wants to go to the accessory apartment and rent out that portion, would not have those kinds of square footage restrictions. Cost of annual inspection.
Cost for an annual inspection is a $25 renewal application fee, as well as then you have the permit fee of $250.
Any grandfathering, I told you that in the beginning there was a grandfather provision for all people, and we also had non-owner occupied apartments were eligible, and they're still out there, but they're decreasing because you can't transfer them. You can transfer with a new application the owner occupied. But grandfathering, you want to address that?
Well, you just mentioned it. The only things that are grandfathered are in the beginning, I believe the square footage did exceed 650 square feet, and I think the bedroom count might have exceeded 2, it might have been up to 3. The non-owner occupied apartments have now since dwindled down. I think we have 138 permits. That's dropped significantly over the last 10 years. But as far as grandfathering in, the bulk of our accessory apartment permits are based off of, because every time someone would transfer a permit, they'd have to concurrent to today's standard. So there is not much grandfathering.
I would like you to address, one thing, and that is, and I think to their credit, the town enforcement of this, when they find somebody who is in violation, does not have a legal accessory apartment, they'll tell them that if they're eligible to have an apartment, and try to guide them through that process. So we take something that is currently illegal and make it legal with all the requirements that go into that. Is that correct, John?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Construction cost to the owner after they have their permit, and that can vary, but you want to...
That's just, my question was, it seems confusing the way you're saying it, that you go through the process, get a permit, get all your ducks in a row, and you have your permit. Great. Now you said it's an annual inspection, and if there are violations found, you need to bring something up to code, if the code changes, there could be additional expenses. So that's what that question, in other words, what's my obligation? Let's say I have an apartment, I have a permit, 3 years, somebody's living there, everything's great. You come by, and then there's a change. So now I have to physically, let's say, put an additional egress access if the code is changed. What's my obligation? You know, what's the annual inspection requiring me to do? How often am I going to have to keep coming up to code?
If you're a new applicant,
That makes sense.
we provide an initial inspection. Our ordinance enforcement will do an initial inspection, and they'll point out to you everything that needs to be addressed in order to obtain a building permit. Once you're issued a permit, the only cost that you have associated with Accessory Apartment Bureau is the renewal fee every year.
Okay.
If you decide that you want to add something to your property, like if you want to put an addition or add a pool.
Yeah, no, that's not my point.
She's asking,
During your annual inspection, you might find something.
I can
that
answer
doesn't-
that.
That's what I was getting to.
But what you got to remember is that every permit that's issued has a recommendation that we put in it's to the ZBA, that a condition be, the property must be maintained in compliance with Huntington Town Code, all federal, state, and local laws. So if there's, what you're saying is that if there's a code change on the state level, on the federal level, on the local level,
Which requires me to do something.
right, but that's going to be with any homeowner.
Well, let me just answer that. I've been a legal apartment for 16 years, okay? And I only one time had to make a code change. It's the same one of insulating my boiler door. So it stands to reason that it doesn't happen that often.
That's actually what I was just going to say. In the almost 10 years that I've been the hearing officer, I can't tell you that there's been any major federal, state, local, or even town of Huntington code change that have required people to go from, okay, these are the conditions of your permit, to you got to build a stairwell on the side of your house. You got to, it just, but the answer is, we have to, as part of the structure of this program, and it's in every recommendation that I sign, it has to be maintained in compliance with Huntington Town Code, because we can't say that, we can't say, oh, well, if the federal government decides you need an extra set of stairwells, we don't have to. That's just beyond our control, but it doesn't happen, but for the rarest instance, and it was something as simple as...
I'm thinking more of square footage things or something.
No, that doesn't No, they tell you right up front what your requirements are. You meet them the first time around, don't expect any real
Well,
major...
if it's 75, go down to 50 and back to 75.
But that doesn't affect you.
So that would be, you would be grandfathered to that.
That wouldn't affect your permit status.
That wouldn't affect your permit status. All that's doing is allowing other properties having the ability to have an accessory apartment that under the current law are not allowed.
It's the approval process.
It's the approval process. If anything goes, if everything goes according to schedule, how long does it take to get a permit?
Joe, you want to answer that?
Well, it varies. It depends if you have a property, an ideal situation where everything pretty much is in compliance. Say you have a high ranch. Those are pretty easy properties, types of dwellings that can be converted to an accessory apartment. If you're going to be, you will be required to get a plumbing permit for a kitchen sink. And as the supervisor alluded to, that could be the same day. If nothing requires building permits, if nothing requires having to go to the zoning board for anything, it's a pretty quick process. It's a matter of meeting with our Tracy Beck from the Accessory Apartment Bureau, going through the application process, setting up an appointment with our Ordinance Inspector Division for an initial, and getting on the calendar for a hearing. And then at the end of towards the end of that, you would have to be, it gets basically stamped off, final approval through the zoning board. As far as length of time, probably anywhere between 30 to 60 days, maybe.
Once the hearings are held.
Do you have a comment, Tracy?
No, I've seen it take as little as 3 months,
Right.
and I've seen it take as much as a couple of years, depending if they need COs.
Right.
Because a lot of the work has to be, a lot of the conditions have to do with having COs and building permits, and that's outside of our control oftentimes. Right? So you have to have those lined up before, and you have to have those in place, because all the conditions of the permit that we lay out. So when I sign off as on a recommendation of the zoning board, please approve this application, the last line underneath everything is the final permit is subject to a final inspection by the Department of Public Safety to make sure that all the things that had to be done are done. And that's where that difference in time can come in.
You know, we're in a little new era with when you sell your house and what the mortgage companies require. Years ago, you bought a house and you sold it. The mortgage company wasn't that concerned about having every CO and every dot, every I dotted and T crossed. Now they are, much more so than they ever were. So that really brings up, not just for accessory, anything to do with accessory apartment, but any home. There are requirements that they don't see you've got a deck or you've got converted your garage to a playroom or something like that, and that was never permitted. Those are things that you have to go before the town and get them rectified. Not that you can't, but it's a process you must go through to bring them up to code and to get a certificate of occupancy. Well, you won't be able to sell your house very easy. I know I did a couple things in mine because I made up my mind, getting up in age, and I wasn't going to leave my kids with all this responsibility afterwards, so it cost me some money, but I made sure that everything that was there when I bought the house now was up to code and had all the proper town permits and COs for it. And I would recommend that to any of you because it's much better to do it earlier than it is to do it later. Is there any thought to do multi-year permits so you don't have to renew every year? I will tell you, when the law was first initiated, we did the homeowner permits were every other year, and the non-owner non-homeowner permits every year, and at some point they changed that so that everybody was every year. I don't know if there's any consideration for that. It's not a big deal to have someone, the inspector comes in your house, if he's there 10, 15 minutes, it's not a big deal.
It's more about the hours though.
What?
It's more about the hours. If you work, it's a little bit harder, because I've always had to take off part in the afternoon or something. And it used to be, and that's not even my question.
So that you have to be home, you mean? Yeah.
Right, and this isn't even my question, but it's a good question. I would do it every 2 years and it was fine. And I've been in permanent for 17 years. Now all of a sudden it's like every year. And I have to go to the bank and get everything notarized and get it. So it is, I get that it's not that big of a deal, but it is a little bit, I wonder if it would be like after 5 years or something, you could go to every 2 years or something, if you had no complaints or something.
One of the things that I think is important as far as the annual inspections is it gives the rest of the neighbors, the community, peace of mind. When we have our public hearings and we talk about the fact that they have concerns about this, about that, about some other things, when we are able to tell them that every year there's an application process and a renewal inspection, it gives the community peace of heart. And as the hearing officer, who was really at the forefront of those concerns at that first instance, when you first apply, I mean, every other Monday or so, or every once a month we have these hearings, that's an important component, I think, to the peace of mind for your neighbors. So as inconvenient as it can be, and I understand that too, because working families, where they, maybe the idea is to try to figure out a way to make it more convenient to do the annual inspections rather than make the inconvenient inspections less often. Because we lose that peace of heart part that I think is very helpful to me as a hearing officer who's trying to, allay the fears of neighbors.
Just follow up on that. They have changed their policy in that now they are not inspecting the whole house. They're only inspecting not initially. Initially they inspect everything. But on the renewal applications, they're just going into the accessory apartment, the renter's property to look at. Is that right, Joe?
Yes, that's right. Unless it's one of the prior existing.
Yeah. Somebody had a question?
Yes. So this was my question. I don't have an accessory apartment, but I find it all very interesting. One thought that I have in my mind is some people might apply once and then because it's an inconvenience, not keep their permit updated. Is there any figures to who applies for 1 year and then, it teeters off?
What do you mean?
You mean you're talking about whether if somebody applies, has an exception, and is approved for a year or so, and decide they don't want to have it anymore?
Or just decides like they can't get together the inspection to have it evaluated each year. Like how many people have an accessory apartment for only 1 year in your?
Well, I don't know that we've compiled that data, but I can tell you that if you have maybe this is maybe a little too broad, but if you have an accessory apartment permit and a year comes around and you say, you know what, and this is for somebody who gets one, right? And then the next year comes around and they're due for renewal and they just don't cooperate. They don't pay their renewal fee, they don't have the inspection, they don't reach out to the town, they're not responding to letters we send, then they get a letter from the town. A letter from the town says, please appear before the hearing officer for consideration of revocation. And what a lot of our revocations are, where nobody shows up, is just those instances where people just give it, they don't want to have it. But the problem for those people is as follows. One of the conditions of the permit is that you have to then have a removal inspection, meaning we have to confirm that the apartment is taken out of the house, and they have to comply with that in order to have the permit.
Right, and I think I understand that, but I'm just saying to make it easier for the homeowner, if there's a schedule, like maybe what they were saying, where you have it and then you have your 1 year, and then it's not such a burden to remember it each year or set it up each year, where it then becomes every other year, every 3 years, every 5 years, it might increase the amount of recurring accessory apartments versus just say doing it initially and then it's teetering off.
Tracy, you're the one who's you're the one who follows up with the annual renewals, right?
Yes.
So how does that work?
I think your question is how many people have started the process and not finished it? gotten to the first permit and then decided not to continue?
The second,
One.
yes.
One. In 3 years I've been doing it.
Oh, okay.
It's very, very rare, and it's very unusual.
All right, we're going to have to get out of this room for the next panel to come in. I'll take one last question if somebody has a pressing question. Please.
I'd just like to make a comment. I've been on the planning board for 15 years, and I just don't, as a scant thing, I hear about accessory apartments. And I want to tell you this, that attending this seminar, all of us, me definitely, I learned so much about accessory apartments, how to apply, what to do, and what the town is doing about it. And I really appreciate it. I just don't have a question. Just want to make a comment about that. That I thought this seminar was terrific. Thank you.
Paul, thank you. Thank you. Please, if you got, I'm not sure what the next, Barry, what's the next group in here? Intergenerational. So if you want to stay with that, go here. If you want the other one, you got to go in the other room. Thank you all. Grab yourself a cup of coffee or whatever.